Hello, everyone. Hi. Welcome. Wonderful people from all around the world. As always, my pleasure to have you all today to host this conversation. We'll talk about incredible topic of being a founder and founder growth stories. So prepare your questions. We have lots of questions that we already collected and we will ask all of them. My name is Ekaterina. I'm co-founder of Future London Academy. And today we have incredible, amazing, fabulous Abi Freeman. Abi is a founder of Brink, an innovation consultancy that is known for creating incredible impact in the world with all the projects that they run, where they really try to create sustainable innovation and think about innovation from a holistic perspective and create change that will last and create something good on this planet. Before that, Abi has been doing incredible work in startup world, consulting startups, working for brilliant companies. And she's also an organizational psychologist. So she has this lens of psychology with everything that she does. And the reason why I'm super excited that we'll have this conversation today, that we will obviously talk about being a founder and Abi growing her agency to international success that it is now, with people working from all around the world. So I cannot imagine hiring people across the globe, and how does it even function when you have to deliver a project on a different continent. So we'll talk all about how do you grow beyond this 2-3 people size to this is 40-50 people size that Abi's agency is right now. We'll talk about culture. What does it mean to create this culture where your team loves working on the projects and can create this impactful innovation? And obviously, we'll talk about incredible projects that Abi does that do create impact in the world. And how do you balance purpose with profit? Not an easy question, but hopefully Abi has some answers. How are you doing, Abi?
Thank you so much for that intro, and really great to see so many of you on this call. I'm great, thank you.
I love that we are having this 1.5 hour together for many reasons. We've known each other for a while, but we never had an opportunity to talk about work. So I felt like, why not have a conversation with other people listening about all things I wanted to ask you? How are you doing it? Because seriously, the work that you're doing is so incredible. And I've been watching it from the sidelines, and it's just so inspiring to see how the projects you work on, they really mean a lot in a global sense. And I can imagine it's not an easy job to win those projects and to run those projects and to deliver those projects that actually will make a difference. Before we start with all these big and meaningful questions, I have 10 rapid fire questions for you so we keep that energy going. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Describe yourself in 3 words.
Tall, curious, and stubborn.
Place on the planet everyone needs to visit.
Mountains, I think the Alps.
Designer, artist, or innovator that you admire right now?
Hockney, I mean, he's still producing and still pushing the boundary of, what medium he uses at whatever age he is. He's ancient now, but I really admire his evolution.
Love it. Hockney is an incredible example. What do you wear for work?
This, I dress casually, comfortably. I'm a mix of working from home or out and about. So, I get properly dressed every day, but, this.
Fantastic. Book that changed your mind on something?
Oh, Man's Search for Meaning. That's the book that changed everything for me. It's heavy, but it's really unlocked the power of mindsets and how it can literally save your life.
Wow. Yeah, that is a very deep and serious book. Great choice. Professional achievements you are the most proud of?
I think Brink. Brink is my proudest achievement to date.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Chocolate. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I get through a lot.
Working from home or coming to the office?
Being out in the world. Coming to the office, but we'll talk about it more, I'm sure. But for me, that means, going to Nairobi, going to Rwanda, being out and about. So, yeah, being out in the world.
If you wouldn't run Brink, what would you do?
I would either be a psychologist rooting around in other people's businesses, or maybe a photographer.
And what is the best part about working in innovation?
Ideas and being around people with ideas. It's not always about new. Sometimes it's about transposing, but yeah, I'm addicted to ideas, I think.
Wonderful answers. And thank you so much for going through this very rapid, very short questions, but you nailed it. Thank you so much. So let's begin. Abi, I always was actually curious. I remember when we talked ages ago and you only had the idea of kind of starting your company, and you were talking about creating something great that will make a difference in the world. And that's such a magical place of a founder when they just kind of brewing an idea and planning to take this big leap and not take their next job opportunity with great salary, or this next whatever freelance gig that might be also very, very interesting. So tell us more about why did you start a company in that moment, and what was the catalyst to actually doing it?
Such a good question. Now with the beauty of hindsight, I can see Brink is something that had been brewing for quite some time. And, I'm here today, but Brink is certainly the creation of both me and my co-founder, Lee. So I just want to say that up front. I had, as you've touched on, I had a background in sort of policy, innovation, entrepreneurship, and then working with tech startups. Meanwhile, my co-founder Lee was working in blue chip, sort of doing major digital transformation. So between us, we were looking at innovation from quite a few different perspectives. And over many kind of conversations, over dinner and wine, we realized that we were both quite frustrated with innovation being treated as this very kind of linear science. Whereas actually, if you're trying to have impact out in the world, or within your organization, or wherever it may be, this work is hard and it's messy and it's humans that are doing it, and we're all emotional and irrational, and that whole human element, that behavioral element, was completely being neglected. So this is something that I've been seeing and noticing for quite some time. But the catalyst was really that moment in time where I'd exited the startup. I'd gone back to school and done my postgrad in organizational psychology. And, Lee also was at a moment in her career where we were both sort of exploring our next projects and, thinking about what's next. So I think, Brink is the combination of both of us. We have an alchemy that brings different perspectives together. And so I think that was really the catalyst for it, is having someone where we're very different, but we're extremely values aligned, and we see the same problem that we wanted to kind of have a go at. And so that's really how Brink was born.
Love this story, and I love how you talk about your co-founder Lee, because you can see how much love and friendship you have, and I feel like it is so important when you're running a company, and especially when you're starting a company, to find someone that you align with on overall vision of life, not even just business, but who you actually could care about and who could care about you. So it's such a wonderful story. What happened next? So it's great to have an idea to run a company. Now, to run a company, you need clients. So, and especially in the space that you're at, it's first of all you involve a lot of businesses and government. So it's not like direct to consumer, where you can ask a friend if they want to buy your new thing. You have to know people, you have to know what they want, and also how to pitch to them so they actually understand what you're offering, and also to make sure that you're offering something of the value. So how did you go about finding your first clients or client, and how did it go from there?
Yeah, I mean, what you describe is spot on. It's very relational, how we started the business and also how it's grown. Lee and I have both been in the business of volume sales, particularly in the tech startup I was in before. That was like a clicks play and a number of transactions play. Whereas at Brink, what we both set out to do was avoid being in that kind of never-ending cycle of having to feed the beast, having to win more work and doing short-term work in order to feed the team that you've built. So we set out to sort of really be part of these much longer burn projects. And more importantly, the kinds of things we want to be working on, like fixing the global education poverty gap, or working on the global oxygen shortage. You're not going to solve that overnight, and you're not going to solve that alone. And so you need to have a lot of relationships with different people who are thinking in the same way. In the early days, we were very fortunate that we had people who believed in us as individuals, before we had much to show, who brought Lee in or me in, and we could sort of build from there. So becoming part of quite substantial pieces of work that were much bigger than us and long term, and sort of starting there and then being able to build on top of that was really something that in the early days, you make a lot of decisions that you think are going to be significant, but you don't really understand how they're going to be significant fully. And I think that decision in the early days to not be selling kind of volume and, short, sharp pieces of work, but to be part of these much bigger, longer systemic pieces has really paid dividends. And I think that's one of, we've made some great decisions, some that haven't worked so well. Happy to talk about all of them, but I think of the early decisions we made, that's really served us well.
I love it. And you're so right that as a company, you should be clear on what kind of work you want, because it is very tempting as an early stage founder to take anything that flies your way, because you do need money to pay yourself and your staff or for the office or whatever you have. And you're obviously very eager to grow as a company. So it's incredible how clear you're on kind of what kind of projects you want and what impact you want to create. So who was your first project, and how did it happen?
Yeah, I mean, we had some smaller pieces as well, where Lee and I were getting to know each other as a co-founding pair and testing our working relationship. And then the one program really that we're still working on today, we're very fortunate, is called the Frontier Tech Hub. And so that's one of the early ones where Lee was brought in, and then I joined to sort of work on elements of it, and it still exists in a different sort of form now. Now it's a major program that's testing a portfolio of about 50 frontier technologies around the world to see if technologies like drones, mesh networks, solar panels, things like that, to explore how they can have impact for international development. But in the early days, that was one of the ones we were very fortunate to be a part of, and we're proud to be a part of still today.
That's incredible. The fact that you still have the project many years later and you still have those relationships. And as you earlier said, I think that world does work on relationship basis. So you make the good impression and you align with people and they believe in your projects and the work that you can do. So when you have another project, it's much easier to collaborate with someone they actually trust. What happened then? Because there is also a tricky balance, especially with long-term projects, about hiring and getting stuff in and money coming in, because I'm sure the project is not paid on the first day, paid somewhere in between or after, while you have to have staff that will work on this project and you know how long that will be. So how did you go about finding the team for this project or the next project that was a long-term, and how did you grow from just you and Leah as a founder to actually having a team?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, I'm really happy to see that our first employee, number one, Asad, is on the call. So direct some of your questions to him in the chat, because he's probably much better placed to answer some of the things we're going to be talking about today than me. But in those early days, I think, again, a decision that any founder faces in the early days is how much risk you want to take and how much you want to back yourself and what you want to invest in. And I think, for us, we're about to turn 6, and still this is true. We sort of hire very much in line with need. We're becoming a bit more speculative now in how we hire, but certainly through those early years, we hired very much in line with need that we could see, and we could see coverage of the roles. So, we really set the bar high with Asad. I'm not just saying that because he's on the call, but we really lucked out, with who we hired first in, and growing from there. Even early on, you have this sort of question of what kind of capabilities you bring in, how, if you want sort of T-shaped people or deep expertise, all of those kind of things. We grew very slowly in the first year, and then in the second year, it sort of started to accelerate. It was really year 3 where we saw some very rapid growth and grew our headcount significantly there. But all along the way, it's been that thinking of being very mindful of growing in line with need, being very mindful of when we are making an investment ahead of that need, or having our partners sort of very much on board. In the early days, our clients were on the hiring panels as well, and very much part of that hiring team to make those decisions with us, which we were just reflecting this week, actually, that we'd like to do more of that again, because it really changes the dynamic and really has everyone more invested in those people coming in being a success in the role.
Love this. And I love that you also mentioned kind of on one hand anticipating the growth and the people you will need, on another hand having this very slow growth process. I feel like with, I suppose, the traditional tech scene where everyone tries to hire as fast as possible and grow as fast as possible. And also this old school mindset of that you measured by how many people you have in the team. So a lot of people pursue the hiring before they actually need. And I love that we actually approach it in a very similar way at Futureland Academy, where we are slower to hire than needed. And that has been probably something that saved us from many troubles and economy difficulties, because when you have this core team that is so incredible, then it's much easier to grow from there. So I think that another thing that you start seeing when you start hiring people, that I'm sure the first people that you hired were more practitioners, whether it's designers, innovation practitioners. And at some point, I like one of our collaborators, Sinks, the founder of Us Too, he described it as you basically running a freelance agency. So you're not really a founder, you just have lots of collaborators and you're all working on projects, but you have no support system. You don't have project management, IT, anything else that is non-billable hours. So everything you do is amazing margins, because everyone basically is doing work that is paid by clients, which is a fantastic place to be, but it's not a realistic scenario for the business. So at which point did you start hiring these more operational people who maybe not directly linked to the revenue, and who were they?
Yeah, it's such a great point. And, you know, every step along the way, you have to think about sort of cost and price and value. You know, what's the cost to us of doing this piece of work? What's the price, you know, how much we're actually going to have to pay, but what's the value? And it was when my co-founder and I were sort of grappling with doing the invoicing and things like that, when we could have been out sort of building new relationships or focusing on the work being excellent. That was when we realized that actually this is not a good use of our time, and nor are we particularly good at it, nor do we enjoy it. So it was our fifth hire actually was someone who at the time had a sort of operations and a bit of a hospitality bent to their role. You know, it's someone who really was there to look after the team, and from early on we built a business that could work a lot with freelancers and with our partners in the work. You know, it was very rarely Brink delivering a piece of work. It's Brink in consortium with others, and the client being a part of that consortium too. So that idea of sort of hosting and looking after the operations was something that we had placed a lot of value on and invested in that early on. So yeah, our fifth hire, just ahead of a little growth spurt that we did that summer of other practitioners, was that kind of operations support. Growth is very lumpy, isn't it? I thought it would be a lot more linear than it is, but it's a very, very lumpy trajectory. And so this year we've just done another set of investing in that kind of central core team. So upgrading, having a new finance person, for the first time a people manager that we've not actually had before. And we've got a brilliant ops person, marketing and comms, you know, all of that stuff, that central function. We've just done that again. That kind of really upgrading all of our internal operating systems, the human bit of it, ready for the year ahead as well.
Love it. And I love that you talk about the order as well, in which, and I suppose it's different for every company, understanding, yeah, what support do you need as a founder and as a company to make sure that your time is dedicated to what you do the best, not invoices or answering, I don't know, IT support questions, but actually, yeah, building relationships or whatever that might be for each founder is slightly different.
That's it. And, you know, it's a balance as well. Like there's obviously a whole constellation of support services that we have around that are becoming part of our team. Like our lawyers sit in their company and we don't hire them, but they're an integral part of our team now. You know, they turn up to socials and they're brilliant. We're not hiring them, nor do they want to be hired. But I'd say across sort of finance, accounting, you know, legal, all of those support functions, that's something that you sometimes have to kiss a few frogs to get it right, as we have. But once you get the right people, the right suppliers, they are a part of your team. You can't run a business without those functions, but you don't have to hire them in. And I think particularly today, the access that we have to fractional things, fractional marketing and fractional CFOs, all of that fractional industry that maybe didn't even exist kind of, you know, like 10 years ago, certainly in my last business, that didn't exist in the same way. So that's been amazing to see that play out and see the access we have to that kind of talent that is part of our team, but, you know, we're not hiring them.
You're so right in terms of how the industry evolved to actually help anyone build a company now, because you can get access to incredible CFOs or legal people without hiring them full time, which would have been crazy amount of money that you will have to pay. And now you can access them, whether it's through services and platforms versus or kind of consultancy and advisory. Any particular services that you would recommend in terms of like something that you use constantly, UK, European, or maybe global ones, in those supportive functions that you feel like do save you time, but also potentially could have been an employee, but you actually found a way to use it as a service?
Such a good question. I don't think there are any that could have been an employee, but I think there are things that the pandemic accelerated that were around before, but they were clunky and not great. So an example would be what's called an employee of record, an EOR, where that gives you the facility to hire people in other countries fully legally and compliant in a compliant way, but you don't have to hire in the kind of HR, the legal advice, the payroll, all of that. It's all packaged up and you just buy that service. I'm sure we'll come on to it, but we have team in 8 countries now. For us to have the in-house capability to upskill in employment law in South Africa and Spain and France, that is a huge amount of work, but instead that service exists where we can work through them to be fully compliant and do that employment. So it's less someone that we would have employed, but it's more just complete gratitude that all of those tech companies, I think, going remote in the pandemic made those services have to get their act together and become a lot more, speedy, intuitive, cheap, all that good stuff, so that much smaller businesses like us can now benefit. So yeah, I think things like employee of record that just make it so frictionless and seamless. You pay, but it's nothing compared to what we'd have to pay to get all of that up to speed in-house.
This is brilliant that you mentioned it, because it does very nicely link to the next question that I had about your global growth. Because what's very unique about you, as you said, like you have employees across the globe actually delivering and working on projects across the globe. And I think it's slightly different for, I suppose, the maybe creative agencies, or where you can have designers, let's say, in any country, which is, again, amazing that we are at this stage. But you actually have people on the ground who deliver things in a variety of countries and places. So how did you go about finding those people and hiring those people? And also, how do you keep relationship with those people, considering, I don't know if you see them all the time or not? Like, how does that work within your company and culture?
Such a good question. So I'll start with the finding the talent bit, and then I'll talk about how we stay sort of together and connected as a team. During the pandemic, 2 of our very intrepid Brinksters, as we call our team, people who work at Brink, came to me and Lee actually with a bit of a proposition. We all knew that our portfolio of work was global, and there's a very strong presence in Africa. Many of the challenges that we're sort of pointing our behavioural innovation methods at, but also many of the sort of opportunities and the energy sits in Africa. So when we looked at our global portfolio, we saw a hotspot in East Africa, and Assad and another colleague, James, sort of said, look, we think that there's something about being much closer to the work that will basically help us deliver much better, more appropriate, much more relevant quality of work. So we've backed them to go and be based in East Africa for 1 year to sort of test the hypothesis that being there would improve the quality of the work, that there's talent there that is, that we're attractive to and that we're compatible with, and also to see if there's sort of growth opportunity for the work there. So fast forward 3 years, we've now got a quarter of the whole team is based in East Africa, and it's just been fantastic to see the level of talent that's available there. It's difficult, we've not always got it right. It's difficult to translate our Brink kind of way of hiring to new cultures, wherever those cultures may be. And so we've had to get a lot better at that. And that's a big project we've done this year, is really reviewing how we hire, debiasing everything, and making sure we've got a hiring process that recognises different cultures and different ways of working and different ways of being. So
Can we actually dive into that a bit quickly?
Yeah.
What are these things that you wish you knew, or you're changing now about the hiring and debiasing and all of that? Because that's such a fascinating subject, and I can imagine it has been such a difficult process. So what did you wish you knew, or what are you changing now to make this better or easier?
It's been really juicy. And, I think part of what's so just continually blows me away about Brink is how high performing our team is and how high the bar is. And so we need to keep that bar high and rising. It's a difficult thing joining a fully remote, fully globally distributed team because you can't see each other. And so over time, we've tried and tested and failed and done a lot of things. But what we've landed on now is we know that we're hiring for ways of being as much as ways of doing. And those ways of being are need to be fully in line with our values. So, one of our values is curiosity. And throughout the whole process, we don't sort of ask people, are you curious? But, we've got ways to look for how they're curious through the process. We're a highly collaborative culture, and our way of working is highly collaborative, as I've mentioned. So you need to be able to respond well to feedback. So you're going to get a lot of real-time feedback on your work. So again, in the hiring process, we test for that. Again, we don't ask people, are you good at feedback? But we'll just lob in a bit of quite tough feedback at some point in the interview process and see how people respond in real time. And, quite quickly you can see if someone gets it's a difficult dynamic in an interview, but still, you can see if someone gets very defensive or if they get very curious. And what you want is for them, even if it's difficult emotionally for them to receive that feedback, what you want is for them to move very quickly into curiosity and dig in. So, for each of our values, we've got things that we have really structured now, what good looks like and how we look for those. And then, there's a whole set of ways of working type things as well. And we need to know people can manage their energy, manage their time, raise a hand when they need stuff. One of the things that's very hard about being remote is I can't see my team. I can't look around the room and see my team. So I need to know that they have that level of self-awareness, that they know what they need, or they can learn that. So, these are the kinds of things in hiring that, regardless of culture, hold true. And then each sort of culture that we're in has its foibles. I'm British and we're difficult. We don't say what we think. We're not forthright. We're not sort of open and honest and direct. And when you're hiring British people, you have to sort of modify for that. Yes, Nina, that's obviously resonating. And the same is true for every culture. There's something possibly in the culture, and we would never want to just, generalize too much. But you just need to be attuned to these things that might be true based on the fact that we're hiring from different cultures. We've got 14 different cultures on the team. So, it's a real melting pot in there. It's not like it's a sort of team of Brits hiring for one particular culture. It's not like that at all. It's much more being attuned to cultural differences and things like Erin Meyer, the culture code and that kind of stuff has really been informing. And then Laszlo Bock's work and how he sort of designed the Google hiring process has been very informing for us as well. So making sure you're hiring not for all of the attributes that I've talked about, but then also that element of potential. You really want to see someone's trajectory, where they're headed in their career, not only where they've been. So a lot of how we hire is also looking at your potential, looking at real world work situations. We workshop stuff, we sort of test what it feels like to work together, and we build evidence. So when we hire, we know we're not just going on hunches, we're not just going on hiring people that look like me. We're going on sort of quite hard evidence that we've built up through the process that shows us this is the right person for the job.
This was so helpful. Thank you for expanding on this. I can see lots of people nodding, and I think it's so important to hear those examples when you do have to assess and look for things that are not necessarily visible, and they're definitely not on the CV. How do you take feedback? Are you a curious person? And definitely someone who describes themselves as curious and taking feedback, well, most likely won't be that. So it's always hard. How do you find those people? Can you tell a little bit more about this process? Because you mentioned workshopping. How long is your hiring process, and maybe what are the key elements of it beyond just, I suppose, a traditional 1-hour interview, anything like that? What are the other things that you include as part of it?
Yeah, it depends on the role, and it depends on the sort of level of experience that we're hoping for. I'll tell you broadly, and then a few specificities based on those things. Broadly, we have an application process where even to apply, you're telling us quite a bit about yourself. We're quite open in what we're asking people at that stage. So there's a set of maybe 3 questions, and you can respond in writing or with a video or a medium of your choice. And that's what we'll use to do our shortlisting. That's also what we'll use then in the first round of the interview, which will be quite technical. Typically it's quite technical. It's looking for, say you're going for one of our innovation coaches roles. What do you know about innovation method? Demonstrating that you've got enough in your toolkit that you can work with us to sort of blend methods and be a successful coach for the ventures that we work with. But, behind the technical stuff, as I described, we'll also have that other set of values that we'll also be measuring for. So even throughout the whole process, are people speedy to respond, and are they polite, and do they thank us, and do they acknowledge, when we're acknowledging them, how do they receive that? All those kinds of things are also throughout. Then, after that first round, we've got quite a strong sense of the technical ability. Then in the second round, we'll typically take them into that sort of real world working simulation. So it will be working with 1 or 2 of the team. We'll bring a real life scenario. Typically, it's something that is real, that the team have either just grappled with or are currently grappling with. What we want to honour sort of people's time as well. So we try not to have too much prep time that they have to do. We try and honour that this does take time, and we can't hire everyone. Those points, if you've made it to interview 1 and you don't make it through, we send quite detailed feedback and also resources on, here's how you get an impact job. Here's some stuff, if you're going for a storytelling role, here's some stuff that's inspired us about careers in storytelling. And we really try and make the process something that is not just extractive and not just us finding our right person, but also is as generous as it can be and gives something back to the candidates by way of learning about themselves, feedback, stuff that they can take forward in their career search. So that's round 2. And then the final round will be sort of a chemistry coffee. We've evolved this recently. We used to say it was just like a nice chemistry meeting, but now we've made it much more clear it is still part of the selection process. And, if all is well, but the chemistry is just not quite there, then that's still something that we'll kind of want to dig into a bit more and see what's up with that. So that's the final decider. And then we do ask for 2 references, but they're not sort of, I don't know, I find the references system a bit broken, and the team have done a beautiful job of writing a sort of structure for asking for a reference. It's more about how can we set this person up for success? What's the stuff we need to know? It's much more focused on that. But the references are now part of the selection process as well. So that's kind of the rough shape of it. If you're going for a very junior exec role, we might sort of do one of those rounds in a group, which is fun. And it's a good way for us to see how you kind of how you are in a group dynamic. And often we try and do that if we're hiring for more than one role, so that competitive aspect isn't too strong, because I think if it's just one role, it is quite tough for people to be in a kind of collaborative, competitive situation. That's tough. And for much more senior roles, often we've hired something that's a lot more relational. So we've maybe had them freelance for a year with us, and then we've made that commitment on both sides to going into much more of a sort of long-term arrangement.
Thank you for sharing, Abi. This is incredible. And I love how your internal processes and how you think about people very much align with how you think about projects and the clients. You want to make this positive impact in the world, and as you describe it, as a dent, and you want to do something good, and that applies to everything that you do and everyone you get in touch with, including candidates that's not going to even be part of your company, but you still feel that you need to provide that impact and some positive change or something for their time, which is fantastic. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I mean, it's that stuff that, it doesn't take much, but it can really make a difference. And we really like to think about what some might call those touch points and invest in them a little bit, because we've all been through hiring processes that suck, and they don't need to really suck that much. So
very true. Very true to that. So let's go back to the question of culture and how do you bring all these people together now that they are all across the world and some of them maybe won't see each other ever. How do you make this company and feel like one company, and how do you think about culture and bringing people in and all of their experiences?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and something that I could talk about for days, and have questions for everyone else on this call as well. We've designed quite intentionally moments for coming together. So twice a year, we literally get to the whole company together in person. We've just had one of those in January. We have another in July. Q2 and Q4, we kick off that quarter with an all team get together. When people are new, they want to know what the agenda is and what are we going to be workshopping. And we don't workshop stuff really. We just hang out, and it's more about being than doing. It's much more about building those relationships, building that intimacy, getting to know each other as humans and having fun, so that when we're back online, when we're back doing, our work is high stakes and it's hard. It's very emotionally draining sometimes. You have to be quite challenging sometimes. It's to be able to do that well with your team, you need a good relationship and a good solid foundation with your team. So it's with that in mind that we invest in sort of bringing everyone together. And then, in Q1 and Q3, we have an online together moment as well, where we do then look at sort of company updates, strategy, finance, all that good stuff. And then weekly we have a couple of touch points where we all get together. We have it used to be a Monday morning meeting, but now a time zone. It's a sort of Monday morning or lunch meeting, depending on what time zone you're in. That's very much about, again, togetherness, checking in. What would be a water cooler moment, just to check in how you are. We started that one in the pandemic. People were not okay in the pandemic, and during that time we spent that hour literally answering the question, how are you? And I found it very moving that people would answer honestly, and they would tell us when they were great, when they were not okay, and what they needed, if it was stuff that the team or work could provide. But just knowing the emotional state and where people are at just helps you sort of be a much better collaborator as well. So we still have an element of that, but now we've added in a bit of kind of information on the work, updates. We're a business of many parts. We've got a lot of programs running concurrently, that different shapes and sizes, on different themes at different stages. So we use that Monday together time to sort of surface something that's going on somewhere in the business and share insights and share stories. And then on Wednesday, we have a thing called Show the Thing, which our brilliant colleague Alice brought from government, actually, which is not words I thought I'd say very much, bringing best practice in from her role in government. But that is where people show work in progress, show something that they've tried that didn't work and share why, or share insights and ideas. So that's kind of rough and ready, very fun, but a kind of working session as well. So those are our sort of the main key moments, and there are others, but as a team, that's the main thing. To the other part of your question, it's very much about cultural contribution for us. So we're not asking you to come and be exactly like me or like Lee or like others on the team. We're asking you to come and be you, contribute and add something. And I think this number of headcount in the very early days, when it was just me and Lee, hitting 40 felt quite daunting, but now it's not a number, it's each individual that brings so much, and they have so much to contribute. And I think it's on founders to create the ways for people to feel some sense of belonging, but also some sense of impact that they can have. And if people have ideas and suggestions, listen to them, put them into action. And if you're not going to, close the feedback loop and tell them why. And it's those sorts of things that I think have really helped people, regardless of background, culture, where they're based, sort of come in and be able to thrive in the sort of remote setting that we have.
There are so many exciting things that you do. This is so exciting to hear, and thank you for sharing. Again, it does feel so coherent with everything that you put on your website and say publicly, and hearing it from the inside, how you make people feel and how you care about everyone's journey and life and personal story. It's incredible. Moving to the kind of the big question of purpose versus profit. Obviously, you created a company with very good intention of creating positive change and doing initiatives that really create an impact in communities and countries. And this is not always something that aligns with necessarily business and making money and growth, for that matter.
Yeah.
How did you find that balance, especially during the early years, when I'm sure there were projects that you could have picked that maybe did not align with where you wanted to take the company, as well as how do you pitch yourself to clients? Because part of it is also being able to sell your great idea so you can actually get the budgets to do that. So how do you balance profit and purpose and find the projects that you want to work on?
Yeah, it's a huge question and a very good one. I think both Lee and I knew that we wanted to do meaningful work, and honor the moments we were at in our careers each, and set out with intention, a lot of intent. And personally, I believe that with all the crises that we have in the world right now, business is one of the most powerful drivers for change, actually. And often the conversation is about purpose versus profit and putting those things diametrically opposed. Like, we do the profit and then we do the purpose bit. In many of my endeavors, I've been exploring that and seeing actually they've been decoupled, how can we bring them back into alignment? And so things like, we're a registered B Corp. For people that don't know B Corp, that means that you have to be profit making, but also be above a certain threshold against about 180 different measures of the impact you have on the society locally, the society through your supply chain and the work you're doing, your workers, your governance structure, who owns the business, all of these kinds of things. So I'm proud to say that we're in, I think, our fourth year of being certified B Corp. So we've stayed above that bar. And B Corp, that's in your legal documents that sit publicly on Companies House, that sort of declaration that you're going to make profit by doing good. And when we started out, there weren't many in the UK, but I think last year they hit 1,000. It's been a very fast growing set of businesses subscribing to those sort of values. But it's not easy. I think for us now, we're 6, it's a lot easier. In the early days, when we were exploring who we are and what we do, we had a lot of super interesting conversations with even tobacco companies, even sugar companies, even that kind of thing, just to explore how might that feel to do that work. In the tobacco company, there were questions like, if we move away from tobacco, what happens to all these farmers? And that's a very big question that I was interested to consider working on. It didn't work out, and so we didn't have to face that decision. But I think there's a lot. It's very nuanced and it's sort of difficult to navigate. I think for Lee and I both, we've been able to stick with our guns and have a lot of integrity. We set out to not do that sort of profit-making stuff over here and purposeful stuff over here, and we've been able to do that. We've been very fortunate, but as I said in my 3 words at the top of this call, also stubborn. But honestly, we haven't had to say no to a huge amount of stuff. I think there's a bit of a sort of momentum is growing in this area. We've got peers out there, many profit-making peers who are also doing very impactful work that we admire and we look to for inspiration as well. So I feel optimistic about this. I think it's actually a lot easier than it's made out to be. And I think, it's that kind of difficult thing of saying no in the early days, but sticking to your guns with that does pay dividends.
I love that you mentioned these gray areas and not so obvious decisions, because I feel like they're even more interesting in the sense like, where do you put this line, whether you're a creative agency, whether you're an innovation agency, whether it's you judge by the type of the clients. So we won't work with tobacco industry, we won't work with kind of certain industries. Do you judge it by what they're trying to do? And because there are so many ethical questions like you just mentioned about tobacco industry, about the farmers and everything else. So what if you could make a positive impact in a bad company? Would you take the project if that would make this company a little bit less bad? So how do you think about those, especially working with governments, I suppose, because you do work with a lot of governments and organizations, and I don't think there is any government in the entire world that is 100% sane. So therefore you will come across a lot of people and departments that maybe you personally question. And how do you think about what you can bring? Basically, can you change someone's mind? If only we work with these people who currently doing the wrong thing, the thing that we don't believe in, but by working with them, we can change their mind into a good thing, versus they're beyond evil, we can't help them, let's not even go there? And
Yeah.
how does it work?
I mean, we've given this a lot of thought, and particularly, last year we launched Brink Foundation, which is our not-for-profit arm. It's wholly owned by Brink, so it sits as part of the same group. But particularly having that foundation now, we've had to do a lot of thinking about what that foundation does is give us the facility for giving grants, so we can take in funds, create a portfolio from that fund with a thesis, and then give that out as grants. And, we had to do a lot of thinking about whose money would we take if there's, for example, fossil fuel money on the table, but it's going to be doing incredible work. Would we touch it or not? And so now we have, it's taken a lot to get there, and we've had to work with the board of our foundation to really thrash it out. But we've got to a place that feels good, that says, we won't take money from where the problem's been caused to solve that problem. That's our own personal view, and it may evolve over time, but that's where we've got to. And then we do have sort of absolute no-go sectors, and tobacco is in there as one. Gambling, all that kind of stuff we've got some sort of quite easy no-go areas as well. But governments are really difficult because we've been faced with questions of working in places where we may disagree quite a lot with the government, but governments and their people are very different. And if it's benefiting the people, then of course we would want to do that. We would never want to deny, for example, when we're working on education and closing that education poverty gap, we would never want to deny people of that, for example. And so sort of being able to think very carefully about what the work's doing in that case, and the long-term impacts and lasting legacy. That sort of fueled our thinking. But this stuff is really, really hard, and it's certainly extremely nuanced, not black and white. And just when we think we've pinned it down, there's another part of the picture that makes it quite difficult. So we certainly don't have all the answers, but we have a starting position, and that's been catalyzed by having that foundation and being faced with some decisions about whose money to accept and what that would mean for us and our work and our integrity.
Thank you for sharing this. And I also appreciate how open you have this conversation in your thinking process, because I don't think you're right. There is no black and white, and there is no final answer, and the thinking can evolve. And I definitely believe that we'll make much bigger progress by having conversation rather than making these blank statements of yes and no, good and bad, and kind of denying certain types of areas, people, whatever, the opportunity for change or conversation. And I love that you found what this means for you, and kind of the structure that makes sense, but also consider evolving and rethinking it as the world evolves, because I think that's very important for a human, for a company, where we might be wrong in our current thinking, and how we might change that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is not where we might be, but we are wrong. We know we're wrong in our current thinking. We just don't know where yet. So that's our approach to everything, really, is there are for sure flaws in this, but let's start and get it out in the real world, and then figure out what we need to change. Yeah.
Love it. And you talk a lot about impact in the den. So let's talk a little bit about that, because again, that's a gray area. We all want, as creatives, as humans, to make positive impact. I don't think anyone in this conversation says, you know what, I don't want any impact. I don't want to do anything. I think we all have very, very noble goals, but it's very difficult, first of all, to make it happen, but then to measure. Did I actually make something positive? How what I do every day affects the world, the client, and beyond the company, maybe the community, and the country or the society. And I know that you put a lot of thinking into that as well. So could you tell a bit more about how do you measure the impact, and how do you describe this kind of dent that you make with the projects that you do?
Another huge question, and a very interesting one. And again, one where certainly we have as many questions as we have answers. In our work, if you imagine our work as a sort of portfolio of different things that we're working on, in the work, often you can quite clearly see the end impact that you're trying to get to as a whole collective, as a program. So in the case of, let's take the Oxygen Collab, for example, we know that almost 1 million babies die unnecessarily of preventable deaths every year from lack of access to oxygen. And then we have, 2 graveyards. We have this other graveyard of kit, of technology that's sat gathering dust not being used properly because it either doesn't have the power or the connectivity or the know-how to use it well in a hospital setting in perhaps a low and middle income country. So solving that is quite a clear vision and quite a clear sort of impact goal that we're all aiming for. And then what we'll be doing as in our work is sort of working back and looking at like, okay, how do we get there? And working through a portfolio of things. When you're working on a portfolio to shift a system, what you're going to find is no one point solution is going to be responsible for shifting that system. It's actually going to be, compounding effect or those sorts of things. So, depending on the type of work, we've got different ways of looking at that and looking collectively at how we're moving towards that very clear goal. And that's the impact that we keep an eye on there. I think the thing that's very interesting about our work is that often the impact that we're looking to have is on the humans who are then doing the stuff, right? So it might be that you have a series of conversations or a conversation with a policymaker or with a minister that shifts their perspective and their mindset. And that is the impact that we're having. So, at Brink, we've looked at having a very scientific way of measuring impact, and in some of our work, that's there in the work, but we've also always got an eye on the much softer stuff, and that's partly why we use the language of dense, because we know that we're sort of a small part of a much bigger thing, a much bigger machinery that's having the impact. But by having a conversation with a minister that shifts his perspective on how technology might be able to help accelerate getting every child in school and learning in their country, that might be the impact that we're having. And then what plays out further down the line is a sort of second order effect.
Could you tell a bit more, because it's fascinating, the projects and the scales of the project that you work on, whether it's the Oxygen project or the Learning project. Can you tell a bit more about what impact were you trying to create, and what did you see, what the difference you were able to make, whether it's big or small, and also what were the key elements for making that difference? As you said, there are lots of human elements, not just the innovation process and design. So what was the impact, and what were the key things that created that impact?
I think a really great example would be that portfolio of frontier technologies that I mentioned earlier. That now it's called the Frontier Technologies Hub. It does many things, but one of the things it's looking to do is build evidence of what works in frontier technologies for international development. So we have this portfolio around the world, for example, looking at, can drones be a sort of useful part of locust management for crop control, for example. And in that case, what we're looking to do is we're looking to learn and build evidence of what works and also of what doesn't. With this kind of work, often what you're looking to do is stop things that aren't working rather than stick with a plan rigidly, even if it's not going to work. And an impact could be stopping something. An impact could be learning that something's not going to work much sooner than you might have done without using innovation methods. So there are elements of impact that I think are sometimes neglected or ignored, and that for me certainly is one of them. The impact of something that you can find out quicker was not going to be successful and was not going to work. So in the case of that portfolio, what we've got is a set of innovation coaches who are working on the individual sort of technology teams who are coupled with the problems, and they're looking at what's the impact we can create out in the world. So in the case of the drones for locusts, it might be how much can we reduce crop damage from locusts, and for us we're looking at what are the coaching conversations we can have that can accelerate that learning, how much learning can we do, how much evidence can we build, and then feeding that back into the funders that we're very fortunate to have, which I should mention, which is FCDO, building that body of evidence for them and feeding that back. And that's where a lot of the impact will happen, because a funding body the size of FCDO, having that information on a portfolio of 50 different technologies being tried in the real world, and what's working, what's not, having a portfolio view of that's where some of the impact is happening as well. So it's on a kind of individual level with that one innovation coach and that team. It's on the level of the technology that's doing its thing in the world. The drones for locusts is one example. Check out the portfolio. I'll share the link after. There's some incredible things in there, like VR for people who are testifying against sexual violence in the International Human Courts of Justice, and looking at sort of how can having that experience through virtual reality before they go into the courts improve the experience for them and improve the rate of people who come forward to testify, because at the moment the sort of trauma of having to go into that court and testify actually is very sort of disincentivizing, and people drop out. So, in that case, you'll have the impact of more people testifying in court, but you'll also have the impact of that technology now that's tried and tested, and how can we scale that? And you'll have the impact of a funding body like FCDO having the evidence and the research of what's working with that technology and how they might be able to scale that worldwide.
Thank you for talking about this human side, because I feel like innovation very often is seen as like technology or some kind of very cold subject, and all the case studies that you share and all the stories that you share very human and very much focus on not just the user need or human need and being human-centered, but also the human impact and how the human feels and how it changes personal experience, which I feel like is something that can be often forgotten with innovation when it talks more about the numbers and the business innovation and kind of the other things that are important part of the innovation ecosystem, but not all of it. So this is very refreshing to hear how you think of individuals and personal and the kind of very empathic approach to that. We'll be taking questions from everyone here. So feel free to start putting your questions in the chat, because we'd love to answer as many of them as possible in the next half an hour. In the meantime, I'll start asking the questions that have been pre-submitted. So hopefully we can answer a few of them as well. One question is about being a founder, and what is the single most common blind spot for founders wanting to grow their agency? Ben is asking.
There's a few answers I could give to this, but I think one is probably around energy levels. In the early days, you really see kind of energy impact out in terms of like progress or delivery or reputation out there, all that kind of stuff. And I think that is great in the early days, but it can be, there's a lot of hustle porn out there, and I came from tech startup land before this. So I think, it's really seen as like a valued thing to often that hustle porn. But I think a blind spot is often kind of trying to do many things, also doing the dutiful things. I think Lee and I have both set out to make sure we've got joy in our work and that we're energized by it. And that's actually a bit of a compass for how we decide what work to take on or not. If we're taking ages to get back about something, we're noticing that we're not feeling energized by it, then that's data. So I think keeping an eye on energy levels in every sense is something it's easy to neglect in those early days when there's so much going on, and things are happening around you. And I think that's the kind of thing that pretty important to check in.
Thank you for sharing. We have lots of questions about networking and getting new clients, and there are a few, so I'll kind of combine them into one, which is, what are your tips to grow the network with new, fresh contacts? And how do you balance between legitimate interest and generate new business leads at the same time? Where do you go for networking? Is it important to do the networks? And all of these questions, lots of people are interested. How important is network? How do you find new business? And also, how do you balance kind of new clients versus finding opportunities and generate interest?
It's a great question. And, I think it's important to note that we're not a high volume business, so we don't need a ton of sales. We're much more a relational business with sort of, very few new pieces of work a year. So that's a bit of a disclaimer. Personally, I'm very allergic to anything that's called networking. That just makes my skin crawl a little bit. But what I love is learning about people, learning about problems in the world, learning about preventable problems that Brink might be able to point its behavioural innovation machine at. And, as I mentioned at the top of the call, in my 3 words, curiosity, I think for me, that's it. So if there's an event and I'm curious about the topic, or I'm curious about the people who are going to be in the room, that to me is such a joy, and I will go and I will love it and I'll learn something. And if that something is useful for Brink, then, that's great. But I think you can smell a mile off when someone's got that kind of salesy approach and that doesn't get a good reaction on the other side. Whereas if this work is about being in it together, building that relationship, building that sort of common view of the problem, so you can think about how to tackle it together. I mean, in very practical terms, when we were starting out, in the early days of Brink, I was looking for where can I go to find people like me, and at that time there wasn't really anywhere. And so I just started a little WhatsApp group. I thought it maybe grow to 10 or 15 people. And it was kind of aimed at finding people like me who also had consultancies, agencies, businesses, or might be potential clients, people in-house, innovation, heads of innovation, that kind of thing. It sort of exploded and there's over 300 people now, and I can't keep up with it. It's so busy, but that thing of you can also curate your own relationship or network experience. You don't only have to go to what already exists. If there's some people you love and they're in town, take them for dinner. And I've been quite astonished at how many people are up for picking up the phone, having a coffee. I just hit people up on LinkedIn every now and again when I find them and I admire them, and just tell them I admire them and I'd like a coffee. And it happens. We've had work happen through that kind of interaction. And for me, that's genuine. I'm not calling them to get new business. I'm calling them because I think they're awesome. But again, we're business people. We're looking out for each other, and I think that spirit of generosity, that spirit of connecting other people, and that they may connect you back, that spirit of curiosity, not extraction, personally is what makes it sort of doable and fun for me.
This is genius. And I love two things about what you mentioned. So one is that you have WhatsApp group, which I'm very familiar with. I'm part of it, which is a lot of fun. And I feel like that is something that people don't see as networking at all, because it's digital and it's a group that is kind of lives on its own, and it's not like an event that you go to or like a kind of constant. You very much don't need to follow every single conversation that goes on there, but like you're part of some community. And the way to figure out how you want to interact with the world in general, whether you are more of an introverted person, so going to a party is not an option for you, but being in a group on a forum, I mean, the old days of forums and chat rooms and all of that, fantastic. If this is what how you like talking to people and finding out about their projects, then it's brilliant. And I feel like more people need to do that and curate their own kind of communities in the channels that they feel comfortable talking, that can be sustainable across years and not going to be like a one power move. I'm going to do the best and I'm going to talk to lots of people this year and then never again I'm going to leave my house. So this is brilliant. And the other thing that I love that you said about kind of finding people that you align with and just inviting them for a coffee. And again, it's so much, it resonates with me, but also with what you say you believe in as an agency, to pick up the projects that you believe in and to pick the work that kind of has this chemistry. And the only way to find that out is by meeting people and by having those conversations. And it matters for the clients as well. I know that for sure in the creative industry that there are so many incredible creative agencies that are just brilliant and have the most amazing award-winning best job in the world. But the clients pick by chemistry, by how you work, who you are, what people work there. And everyone, or many people can do great work, but can you have a great relationship with someone and enjoy the process of doing work? That's what's important. So building those very personal connections, I think, is beautiful and definitely underestimated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think exactly what you're saying is right. It's a very personal thing. There's no one size fits all, but I think as well, it's needs to be in line with what you're setting out to do, whatever that is. So for us, we're behavioural innovation people. We're all about solving problems, ideas that may solve those problems, and people. So for me, those are the things that really kind of power how I do my networking. For each person, that's going to be different, but I think that's sort of I don't know, you could call it being on brand, but it's just being authentic and being very aligned in how you're doing things.
Alex is asking, as someone who is seriously considering starting up something himself, how do you take the first step?
Alex, congratulations, and what an exciting / daunting / confusing moment in time and place to be in. I'm very excited for you wherever you end up. It's a good question. I mean, my advice would be to just start. I think innovation coach in me would ask, what's the smallest thing you could do tomorrow to test the hunch that you have, and really getting out in the world and in front of people. Like I've said earlier, for us, a lot of the time we know that our ideas are not quite right. They're going to be flawed, but we don't know where yet until we put them out into the real world. So there's just starting. It's going to be hugely imperfect. You know, when we started, we had a different name, which was horrendous. We didn't yet know, hadn't yet coined the term behavioural innovation to describe our approach and our lens on the world yet. But we just got going, and you know, we very quickly learned the brand name is horrible. We quickly learned behavioural innovation, having a name for our approach. And being able to codify and explain that was going to be beneficial. There is, depending on what you want to do, Alex, there's always a timing issue. You know, I think for me, I've had this idea for many, many years to run this kind of, to build a consultancy in roughly this space. But for me, the timing was, you know, my co-founder also being available, me coming out to that startup and having the time to lift my gaze to the horizon. And, you know, for me, it was internal timing, but there's also external factors. You know, the year we're going into is bonkers. It's like it's literally the biggest election year. So if your stuff is going to be at all affected by elections, is that something you can lean into or something to kind of sit back and wait for? For us, our business growth was, you know, the pandemic was hard, but it also accelerated our business growth because we were able to point the machinery we'd built at something that was very urgent, at the problem of oxygen, COVID, concentrators, masks, you know. So yeah, there's going to be a timing thing for you as well. I would say taking the first step is really just being brave and getting out there with your idea and whatever that looks like for you.
Good luck, Alex. We all believe in you. I feel like everyone in this conversation is sending you lots of energy and love. I think with all of that, you definitely will do something fantastic. So thank you for your question. Henry, who's a huge fan of Brink, and is saying lots of incredible things about Brink that we also support and how amazing and shining light in the innovation agency ecosphere. So he has a question. First question is about procurement process for working with government departments. Is very long. Is it very long and difficult? That's the question.
Hi, Henry. It's so lovely to move off the LinkedIn page and into this forum and see you. In a word, yes, it can be very, very long and very laborious. You know, in the early days of Brink, my co-founder and I invested very heavily in one procurement process that literally took months. And it was one of those processes that got awarded and then was contested, and then they had to put it back on the market. You know, it went up and down and all around. I'm very happy to say that investment for us paid off, and you know, we now have that we're part of that piece of work. But it can be very, very hefty. There are things that you can do to shortcut it, like there are frameworks you can get on, and I know people who are on some of the UK government's sort of digital design frameworks and things like that, where once you're in, it means you're in this shortlist where any opportunity, they only put it out to that shortlist, and you know, or a subset of that shortlist. So those are definitely worth considering and finding out sort of who people like you or what frameworks are there. And you know, the work can be in my and our experience hugely rewarding and ultimately worth it. But it is competitive, and you know, we've talked about relationships, but there's also the procurement element of what we do a lot at Brink, and you know, we haven't won all of them. You don't always win, so you have to make that investment knowing that might be the outcome.
Before I ask the second question, I have a follow-up question to this part of the conversation, which is the investment you put in for pitch, for procurement process, for anything. I think for every company will be slightly different. For creative agencies, a lot of time pitching and trying to find new clients and be part of these conversations versus winning the work. In your case, is government procurement and everything else. How do you think about it? How do you make sure that you win? What's your winning ratio? How do you think about it in general, the time that you invest in projects versus what you win or what you need to win to make sure it's worth it?
Yeah, our work is very much procurement based. So, you know, in my co-founder, I've got someone who's hugely talented at pitches from her background, but you know, we've come into this world and it's not a way that it's not how our business growth works. So it is very, very procurement proposal heavy. And, you know, with that in mind, it just means that when we've got very good at having a sort of selection criteria scorecard for whether we go ahead or not. And you know, there's quite a few elements to it. You know, are we best placed to do this work? Are we going to enjoy it? Do we have any kind of relationship with that organization already? Do they know who we are? Do we have the kind of technical expertise that's needed? All of these things. So for us, we're very discerning about doing even deciding to go for something, as everyone has to be, before we sort of start to make that investment in what can be a very long process. So yeah, it's a bit of an art and a science, and it's not always predictable, I think, in where the opportunities are going to be coming. I think, particularly with government, you can know something's coming, but it can be delayed by a year or more. So that's something that you have to sort of get to grips with as well, is sort of knowing what the pipeline of opportunities might be, but also having to deal with those timescales that move quite slowly.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love that you again mentioned kind of your personal thoughts on kind of prioritizing the projects, and how even before you start this process, how thoughtful you are about, is this the right project? And I was just laughing on the inside when you talked about kind of how do we feel about the project, and is that something we want to do? Because I definitely been in many situations when you pitch for the project and you kind of don't want to win it already, and you have this feeling kind of that you don't want to put your best effort. And I feel like there are a lot of teams and companies sometimes stuck in that situation when everyone on the team knows that's not the right thing, but for some reason kind of still goes for that. And I feel like it sometimes can be very demoralizing for the team and for the company when you don't win the pitches, even though you didn't want them in the first place.
It's hard, and it's hard, and there's of course always a commercial consideration behind everything we're talking about. And so you may, as a founder, be faced with almost a sort of moral dilemma of, do you go for that work or do you have to make layoffs? And I know I'd rather win the work, but it might be that making the layoffs is the thing that you have to do. So it's really not easy, and I don't want to belittle that kind of decision, because I think we often are in a very privileged position where we can make those choices, and we may not always be able to make them, but for now we're doing our best.
And the second follow-up on that, because you mentioned this unpredictability and the length of the pitching and or procurement, how does that affect how you think about the team and the growth as well? Because again, for any service-oriented company, whether it is creative agency or innovation company, that is a big challenge. You either have lots of projects or you have nothing, and then you either don't have enough people or everyone is sitting doing nothing. So how do you balance all of that to make sure that when there is nothing, there is something to do, and also you're not overwhelmed with the amount of work that suddenly happens at the same time?
The feast or famine dilemma, it's a classic. One of the things we've talked about, some of the things that are possible for business in this day and age, and one of those is freelancers. And I think having a brilliant roster of freelancers who are like-minded, their way of working is very aligned. We've been very lucky with having some of those around so that we can flex. We have certain peaks and troughs at different times of the year, and being able to bring in some brilliant people who know us and we know them, that's been a huge asset for us as a team. It's hard, it's really hard. And I think even with these sort of longer line of sight pieces of work that we have, we have two kinds of people. We have either people who sort of go on one program for quite long term and work in that way, or we have people who go in at very specific moments, like to set up a strategy or to do a sort of storytelling piece of packaging up at the end of a piece of work, or those moments through the life cycle of a program. And we're getting a lot better at knowing what those moments are going to be and planning for them. And that's always going to be work in progress for us, knowing how those behave. So yeah, it's really challenging. I think we've been lucky to not have huge amounts of people with what others might call bench time, but what we do have is quite a few things up our sleeves. So if we do have some of our brilliant talented team on the notional bench, we've got things that they could be working on and still feeling like they're adding value, feeling like they're a valued part of the team, whilst also doing something that's useful rather than twiddling their thumbs.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for answering. Behavioral change around climate change is really hard. Is there too much punitive action taken right now? For example, ULEZ, and not enough encouragement, for example, money for bottles recycled, etc.
Henry, it's such a good question. It's a huge one. I'm not sure we've got time to fully answer it, but something I've been working on with colleagues at Brink, and we've been designing is a sort of behavior change spectrum, and one of the things we particularly want to point out is climate. If you think of reducing let's use your example of bottles. You know, if you want to think of reducing plastic bottles usage, you could put the onus only on the individual and try and do nudges, like try and kind of move them away from, move them onto a higher shelf in a supermarket or something, but really put the onus on the individual. You could have sort of some incentives, like we'll give you money to bring the bottle back, you know, or to recycle it. And that's sort of starting to get into sort of more action at scale or more reliable action. And then further up the spectrum, you have things that don't actually have to be punitive. They can be motivating, but they're more in that kind of policy, rules, or up to laws, and you know, whether or not they're enforced is a whole different thing. But on the spectrum from kind of an individual level, very cheap to implement nudge, right up to a kind of national level, expensive to implement, but if it's enforced, highly effective law, you've got a whole spectrum of stuff that you can do. And yeah, it doesn't have to be punitive, it can be very incentivizing. I think, you know, many of the countries we work with in Africa have done a brilliant job on the plastic bottles or plastic bags question of going down the kind of law end of things and just doing a blanket ban. When I go and see my team in Rwanda, where we have you know, an office and an entity there, you can't take plastic bags or bottles into the country. So, you know, at the airport, you have to ditch them. And, you know, it's stuff like that that is just the way it is there. It's become kind of the culture, and it's just become accepted because it's been that sort of top down thing, but with quite a lot of, you know, campaigns around it as well, like on the radio shows talking about how plastic is bad, or having even soap operas sort of seeded into the scripts, elements of talking about how these things are changing and shifting behaviour, but through using sort of cultural touch points and other touch points that aren't just law enforcement. So it's a huge question and a big one. I hope I've sort of scratched the surface of my thoughts on it. But I'm always a fan of a carrot, not a stick. Sometimes you need a mix of both. You know, we're all motivated by internal or intrinsic things and external, extrinsic things. The more you can tap into the internal and the intrinsic, typically, it always depends, but typically you're going to have a much better and easier outcome for everyone.
Love this. I feel like it was the beginning of another 2-hour conversation on such a great topic. Yeah. I wish we could do another 2 hours on it, but I'm sure we will have a follow-up one day to talk about incredible things that we as creatives can change in the world and should think about changing. And definitely there are things that we can actually have an impact on, which is incredible. But we're out of time, so I would love to wrap up this conversation with one question that I ask all incredible creative leaders, which is, if you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
It has to be something about gender for me. You know, we're a couple of 100 years away from achieving gender equality. So I think, you know, pay women equally, invest in women, listen to women, put them on stage as you have done today. I think it has to be that for me.
Love this answer and could not agree more, of course. So thank you so much, Abi. This was so insightful, so wonderful, so human, so warm. I felt like we just had a chat near the fireplace about the most important things in life. So thank you for sharing your perspective from the business side, from the human side, from the world and global side. And I can see that everyone here really enjoyed our conversation. So thanks everyone for joining as well. I hope you're leaving this conversation inspired to do some great things and create businesses, create impact in the world. And thanks for all of your hearts and love. This has been wonderful. Thanks, Abi. And please all check out Abi's work at Hello Brink. They do so much great, incredible work around the world that definitely everyone should be aware of it. Any last words from you, Abi?
Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really fun, and thanks to everyone for joining. It's been great to have your questions and provocations as well.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, until next time, and thanks a lot for staying until the end. And bye.